Today in Key West History is a proud member of the Florida Keys Podcast Network. Titus R Walters was a confidential informant. He was being used in a drug investigation in early August of 1975. A conversation that Walters had with the Monroe County Sheriff's Office in connection with this investigation had resulted in Bobby Marion Francis's arrest for dealing in narcotics. After this incident, Bobby Marion Francis had vowed that he would kill Walters. The event leading to the actual murder of Titus Walters apparently began on August 16, 1975, when Opal Lee and Charlene Duncan went to Key West from Miami to deliver a package from Bobby Marion Francis to Elmer Wesley. Francis had given Duncan some money for her bus ticket. Upon arriving in Key West, Lee and Duncan went to the home of Elmer Wesley. There, they were introduced to Titus R. Walters, who tried to make a move on Lee. Walters continued to harass them and eventually punched Lee in the face, knocked her down, pulled out a gun, and shot at Duncan. Duncan then called Francis in Miami and told him what occurred. When Deborah Wesley Evans, who's Elmer Wesley's sister, Arnold Moore, and Walters arrived at Wesley's home, Francis, Lee, Orr, and Duncan came out from behind a curtain that separated the living room from the kitchen. Francis told Walters to get on his knees and ask him why he punched Francis's woman in the mouth. Walters began to plead with him to let him explain. At that point, Orr took Evans and Moore into the kitchen. They heard a gunshot and heard Walters plead for his life. At that point, Francis had only shot into the floor, but Francis then took Walters into the bathroom, made him sit backwards on the commode, put a washcloth in his mouth, and taped his hands and his mouth. Francis went into the kitchen and requested syringes and Drano, which he proposed to inject into Walters' veins. These items were later found in Wesley's home. Francis went into the bathroom and shot Walters in the head. But it wasn't a fatal wound. Francis, with a pillow and a gun in hand, came into the kitchen and informed those present that the victim must have strong roots because he would not die. He told the others that they were all part of the conspiracy and that they would have to dispose of the body. He then went back into the bathroom and fatally shot Walters through the heart. When Walters' body was found in a bathtub in the Key West home, his hands were bound and his mouth was taped shut. Powder burns on his body indicated that he had been shot at close range. The police officers recovered a pillow with 6 holes and a black substance on it, which were consistent with gunshots being fired through it. 46-year-old Bobby Marion Francis was put to death less than 24 hours after the United States Supreme Court sharply limited the right of inmates to pursue federal court appeals after missing deadlines for appealing their cases to the state court. He had come within 4 hours of execution previously before a federal appeals court in Atlanta granted a stay. The stay was lifted after the Supreme Court's ruling. Mr. Francis was sentenced in 1983 to die for the 1975 slaying of Titus R. Walters, the informer in the drug investigation that resulted in Mr. Francis's arrest. The judge at his trial overruled the jury's recommendation of life imprisonment. Mr. Francis was the 27th person in Florida and the 148th in the United States to be executed since the Supreme Court in 1976 allowed states to resume capital punishment. He was declared dead at 7:07 a.m., about 3 minutes after an executioner threw the switch on the electric chair, sending 2,000 volts through Mr. Francis's body. Mr. Francis, a Muslim, began his last statement by chanting in Arabic, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet." Mr. Francis's Imam, Rabbani Muhammad, joined with about a dozen other death penalty opponents at a protest vigil in a pasture outside the prison. He said that Mr. Francis had accepted his fate as Allah's will. And it was today, March 28th, 1983, The Dade County Circuit Court jury deliberated for 58 minutes before finding Bobby Marion Francis guilty of first-degree murder in the August 1976 slaying of Titus Walters in Key West. It was the third conviction of Francis for the murder. The early convictions had been overturned on appeal. The jury recommended life imprisonment, but Judge Philip Knight sentenced Francis to death. It's also interesting to note that the name Bobby Marion Francis also came up in another criminal case in Key West, and it was the Bum Farto case. So go back and listen to the episode entitled Where is Bum Farto, and you'll hear more about the criminal exploits of Bobby Marion Francis. And that's what happened today in Key West history. Today in Key West history is brought to you by 43 Keys Media. You can find this program as well as others as an Alexa flash briefing. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. So wherever you're listening, subscribe and never miss an episode. And then when you want to learn more about what's going on in the beautiful Florida Keys, visit us at 43keys.com. And you can also check out other shows related to the beautiful Florida Keys on the Florida Keys Podcast Network.